"I'm sorry, Mom, but you're not family anymore. My daughter-in-law, Claire," said as she folded her arms, standing in the middle of my own living room. Her tone was cold, sharp enough to slice through my heart. And now, here she was 2 years later, sitting on my hospital bed, tears streaming down her face, begging me for my kidney. "Please, Mom, you're my only hope," she whispered, gripping my hand as the monitors beeped softly in the background. I looked at her swollen eyes, her trembling fingers, and for a moment, I remembered the day she pushed me out of my son's house, the same house I helped them buy. The same woman who once said I wasn't family, now calling me Mom again. But before I tell you what I said to her that day, before you decide whether I was right or wrong, let me take you back to where it all began. Before everything fell apart. If you're watching this, tell me what time it is, where you are, and which country you're watching from. My name is Margaret Turner, and I'm 70 years old. I used to believe that kindness could melt even the coldest heart. That's how I lived my life, with open arms and a warm smile. But sometimes, kindness is taken for weakness, and that's a lesson I learned the hard way. I raised my only son, Ethan, alone after my husband died in a car accident when Ethan was just 7. It wasn't easy working 2 jobs, keeping the lights on, skipping meals so he could eat. But I never complained. Seeing my boy grow into a strong, educated man was all the reward I needed. When Ethan met Claire, I was genuinely happy for him. She was young, beautiful, and ambitious, a nurse who seemed caring and respectful. The first time she came to our home, she brought flowers and called me Mama Maggie. I remember thinking, God finally answered my prayers. My boy found someone who will love him the way I did. But I was wrong, so very wrong. The first sign came after their wedding. I had sold my late husband's old truck to help them with their mortgage. It wasn't much, but I wanted them to start life without too much debt. At first, everything seemed fine. Ethan called me every Sunday, and Claire would sometimes send pictures of them cooking together. Then, the calls became less frequent. When I visited, the air in the house felt heavy. Claire barely smiled. She'd say things like, "Oh, Margaret, you didn't have to come," while glancing at her watch like she had somewhere better to be. Still, I ignored it. I told myself she was just tired from work. But mothers, we know when something is wrong. One evening, Ethan came over alone. He sat quietly at my kitchen table, stirring his coffee without drinking it. I could see the weight in his eyes. "Mom," he said softly, "Claire thinks we need more privacy. She feels like you come around too often." I froze. I hadn't been there in 3 weeks. I smiled through the ache in my chest and said, "All right, dear. If that's what she wants, I'll give you space." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're the best, Mom." But what he didn't know was that his wife had already told the neighbors that I was too controlling, that I wanted to run their marriage. I only found out when Mrs. Jenkins, our next-door neighbor, pulled me aside one morning and said, "Margaret, honey, is everything okay? Claire's been saying some things about you." My stomach dropped. I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew the woman my son married had already decided I didn't belong in their lives. Months passed, and things got worse. On my 71st birthday, I invited Ethan and Claire for dinner. I cooked all his childhood favorites: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and apple pie. I set the table, lit candles, even wore the dress he bought me years ago. They didn't show up. Hours later, Ethan called to say they got busy. I sat at that table until midnight, staring at the cold food, trying not to cry. But I did. The next morning, I made up my mind I'd stop bothering them. Maybe that was love too, learning when to let go. Almost a year went by before I saw them again. I was sitting in church when someone tapped my shoulder. I turned, and there was Ethan, smiling nervously. Claire stood beside him, her arms crossed, belly slightly rounded. She was pregnant. My heart filled with joy. A grandchild. A new chance to be part of their lives again. "Congratulations," I said, hugging them both. Claire smiled faintly. "Thanks, Margaret." Something about the way she said my name stung. No Mama Maggie this time. Still, I offered to help with anything they needed: baby shopping, doctor's visits, cooking after delivery. But a few months later, I got a message from Ethan. "Mom, Claire says it's best if you don't come around for a while. She wants to rest and focus on the baby." I sighed, set the phone down, and whispered a prayer. I didn't know then that this was only the beginning of the storm. The baby, little Sophia, was born in spring. I found out about her birth not from my son, but from a Facebook post. I stared at the photo: Ethan holding his baby girl, Claire smiling beside him, and my heart cracked wide open. I called, but no one picked up. I sent messages, no reply. So I went to the hospital. I brought a small teddy bear and a knitted blanket I made myself. When I reached their room, Claire was feeding the baby while Ethan was checking his phone. I smiled. "Oh, she's beautiful," I whispered. But before I could take another step, Claire looked up and said calmly, "Margaret, this is a private room. You shouldn't be here." The room went quiet. Ethan looked helpless, torn between his wife and his mother. "I just wanted to see my granddaughter," I said softly. "She's my daughter," Claire snapped, "and you'll see her when we say so. Please leave." Ethan didn't say a word. I left that hospital with tears streaming down my cheeks, clutching the teddy bear like a broken promise. Weeks later, something worse happened. Ethan came by one evening, looking pale and drained. "Mom, Claire wants to sell the house," he said. "The one I helped you buy?" I asked. He nodded. "She wants something bigger. She says this place has too many bad memories." Bad memories? Those walls had heard my laughter, my prayers, my son's first words. I didn't argue. I just said, if that's what makes her happy. But the real blow came the next morning, when I went over to drop off a family photo album I found while cleaning. Claire opened the door, arms folded. She didn't even let me step inside. "Margaret," she said coldly, "you've done enough. This is our home and our family. You're not part of it anymore." My world stopped. I stared at her, my lips trembling. "What did you just say?" "You heard me. You're not family. Please don't come back." Then she closed the door. Just like that. My knees almost gave way. I stood there on the porch, clutching the photo album against my chest, the wind biting my cheeks. The woman who once called me Mom had just erased me like I was nothing. I thought that was the end. Until 2 years later, when the phone rang at 2 a.m. It was Ethan. His voice was shaking. "Mom, Claire's sick. The doctors say she needs a kidney transplant. You're the only match." And just like that, everything came rushing back: the words she said, the door she slammed, the pain she caused. And now she wanted my kidney. I sat on the edge of my bed, silent, staring at the dark. Was this God's way of testing me, or giving me the power to choose? Because that day, when I walked into her hospital room "Mom, and please, saw her crying, you're her calling only me hope," Mom again, Ethan's I realized voice trembled sometimes as he revenge stood doesn't beside come with Claire's shouting hospital or bed. anger. The smell of Sometimes antiseptic it comes filled the air, quietly, and the faint and what I beeping said of next machines echoed changed in the room. everything. Claire looked fragile, pale, weak, and nothing like the proud, confident woman who once told me I wasn't family. For a long moment, I said nothing. My eyes moved between them: the son I had raised with love and sacrifice, and the woman who had nearly broken my spirit. I wanted to speak, but the words caught in my throat. I turned away, staring out the window at the rain falling against the glass. "Does she even want my help?" I asked quietly. Claire's lips trembled. "Yes, I do," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I was wrong, Margaret. I shouldn't have said those things. Please, don't let me die." Her words hung in the air like smoke. For a second, I felt a pang of sympathy, but it was tangled with years of pain and humiliation. I had dreamed of hearing those words. I was wrong, but not like this. Not in a hospital room with her hooked to machines and my son looking at me like I was his last hope. I took a deep breath. "I'll think about it," I said softly, then turned to leave. Ethan reached out. "Mom, please." I stopped him with a gentle wave of my hand. "Don't beg me, Ethan. Let me think." Then I walked out. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of rain against my window felt like whispers from the past. Every memory of Claire replayed in my mind, her smile at the wedding, her cold eyes at the hospital, the words that cut deeper than any knife. "You're not family anymore." But there was something else too. The night my husband died. We were driving home from his late shift when the truck skidded on black ice. He didn't make it. I remember holding his hand as he took his last breath and saying, "I forgive you for everything." Forgiveness. That word haunted me now. Could I forgive Claire? Did I even want to? I turned on the lamp, opened my old Bible, and whispered, "God, what should I do?" My eyes landed on a verse I'd underlined years ago. "If your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him drink." I sighed, closing the book. "Lord," I muttered, "you sure make forgiveness sound easy." The next morning, I decided to visit the hospital again. When I arrived, Ethan was sitting outside the room, head buried in his hands. He looked older, worn out, like life had taken a piece of him too. He looked up when he saw me. "Mom, she's getting worse." I nodded and walked into the room. Claire looked smaller than I remembered. Her hands trembled as she reached for mine. "Margaret, I don't deserve your kindness, but please, for Ethan's sake, for Sophia's sake, don't let me die." Sophia, my granddaughter. The thought of that little girl growing up without a mother struck something deep in me. I had lost my husband, and I knew the pain of watching someone you love slip away. But still, part of me whispered, "This is the same woman who erased you from her family." I sat down beside her and said quietly, "Claire, I'll take the tests, but that doesn't mean I've decided yet." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Ethan squeezed my shoulder. "You're an angel, Mom." I smiled faintly. "No, son, I'm just human." 2 days later, the doctor confirmed it. I was a perfect match. When he told me, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, fear, and something I couldn't quite name, power. For years, Claire had treated me like I didn't matter. Now, her life depended on me. Was it wrong to feel satisfied? That night, I sat in my small kitchen, staring at the old family photo I'd kept on the wall. Ethan, smiling with his arm around Claire. I remembered when I took that picture. They were so happy back then, so full of hope. And I wondered what happened. Was it my fault? Did I love too much? Did I meddle? Or was Claire just threatened by the love between a mother and her son? Whatever it was, the damage had been done. And now, the woman who once said I didn't belong was lying in a hospital bed, praying that I'd save her life. A week later, the hospital called. They wanted to schedule the surgery as soon as possible, but I hadn't given my final answer. Ethan came to see me that evening. He brought Sophia along, a bright little girl with curly brown hair and curious green eyes. "Say hi to Grandma," Ethan said gently. Sophia grinned. "Hi, Grandma Maggie." My heart melted instantly. Well, aren't you a ray of sunshine? I said, pulling her into a hug. She giggled and handed me a small crayon, drawing a house with 3 stick figures holding hands. That's Mommy, Daddy, and you, she said proudly. I smiled, tears stinging my eyes. Thank you, sweetheart. It's beautiful. Ethan sat quietly as Sophia played with my old photo albums. After a while, he said, Mom, I know she hurt you. I know she said terrible things. But she's scared, and she regrets everything. I looked at him, my eyes tired but soft. Regret doesn't always erase damage, Ethan. He nodded. I know, but she's my wife, Sophia's mother. I can't lose her. I sighed. You've always had a soft heart. You get that from me. He smiled weakly. Then maybe you'll understand why I'm begging you. I looked down at the little girl drawing on my carpet, humming to herself. For her, maybe I could do it. But forgiveness doesn't come overnight. That night, I had a dream. I was standing in a garden filled with roses, some red, some white, some blackened and dying. My husband stood beside me, smiling softly. Margie, he said, don't let bitterness take your joy. When I woke up, my pillow was wet with tears. Maybe this was my chance to heal not just Claire, but myself. So, the next morning, I called the hospital and said, I'll do it. They scheduled the surgery for the following week. Ethan cried when I told him. Claire, too weak to speak, just nodded, tears sliding down her pale cheeks. For a brief moment, I felt peace. Maybe this was the right thing to do. But then, something happened. Something that changed everything. The night before the surgery, I overheard a conversation that froze my blood. I had gone to the hospital early to drop off a few personal items. As I walked past Claire's room, I heard voices, Ethan's and another woman's. I stopped when I heard my name. Mom's doing it, Ethan said quietly. The other voice, a soft, unfamiliar one, replied, Are you sure you want her kidney? After everything she's done? Claire's voice came next, weak but cold. Don't start that, Abby. She owes me, after the years she made me feel unwanted. I froze. Owes her? My chest tightened, my hands shaking. All those apologies, the tears, the begging, had it all been fake? I pressed my back against the wall, trying to breathe. The rain outside tapped against the window like a warning. She owes me. Those words burned in my mind. I quietly turned and walked away, my heart pounding, my mind spinning with betrayal and disbelief. The next morning, when the doctor came to confirm the surgery, I looked him straight in the eye and said, But I'll stop there, because what I told that doctor changed everything. The doctor's name was Dr. Reynolds, a kind man in his 40s, with tired eyes that carried too many stories of life and death. He looked up from the clipboard when I said his name. Mrs. Turner? I took a deep breath, my hands trembling slightly as I held the edge of my shawl. Doctor, I've changed my mind. He frowned. About the surgery? Yes, I said softly but firmly. I won't be donating my kidney. For a long second, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the clock. Then Dr. Reynolds leaned forward. May I ask why? You're a perfect match. The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning. I swallowed hard. My heart was heavy, but my spirit was clear. Because I just realized, I said slowly, that some people don't deserve the very thing they tried to destroy. He studied my face, maybe trying to read the pain behind my words. But I didn't owe him an explanation. I simply added, Please remove my name from the donor list. He nodded slowly. Of course, Mrs. Turner. I'll update the records. But you understand what this means for your daughter-in-law? My eyes dropped to the floor. Yes, I understand completely. And with that, I turned and walked out. That night, sleep didn't come easy. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment since Claire came into our lives. Her laughter, her lies, her cruelty. And then, that whisper, "She owes me." It echoed over and over until my chest burned with old wounds. I wanted to cry, not because of guilt, but because I realized how deeply I had allowed her to wound me. After all these years of being kind, patient, forgiving, I finally saw how far kindness could be stretched before it broke. I got up, walked to the window, and looked at the faint city lights flickering in the distance. Somewhere out there, my son was sitting beside his wife, probably believing I'd save her, and that broke my heart more than anything else. I whispered to the night, "Lord, if I'm wrong, forgive me, but I can't let her use me again." The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Ethan. I let it ring twice before answering. "Mom?" His voice was frantic. "Dr. Reynolds just told me you canceled the surgery. Why? What happened?" I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Ethan, I can't do it." He was silent for a moment, then his voice cracked. "You can't? Or you won't?" "Both," I said. "I can't keep giving to someone who never saw me as family." He exhaled sharply. "Mom, she's dying. Please, don't do this. Don't punish her like this." "Punish?" My voice rose without meaning to. "Ethan, she told me I wasn't family anymore. She shut me out of your life. I found out about my granddaughter on Facebook. Mom, I know she made mistakes." "Mistakes?" I snapped. "Ethan," she said, "I owe her." The line went quiet. Then I heard him whisper, "What?" I could almost picture his face, that mix of confusion and disbelief. "I heard her last night," I said. "I came to the hospital and overheard her talking to someone. She said I owe her, that I made her feel unwanted." He didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he said softly, "Mom, I'll talk to her." "Don't bother," I said. "I've made my choice." And then, before my voice could break, I hung up. The following days were quiet, too quiet. The house felt colder, emptier. I avoided social media, avoided the phone, avoided everything that reminded me of Ethan or Claire. I spent my time in the garden, trimming roses, watering the lavender, talking to the wind like I used to talk to my late husband. But even in silence, guilt has a way of finding you. One evening, I sat outside on the porch as the sun dipped low behind the trees. I was sipping tea when a car pulled into the driveway. Ethan stepped out. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his hair uncombed. "Mom," he said quietly. "Ethan?" He walked up the steps slowly, hands in his pockets. "She told me the truth," he said. I looked at him sharply. "The truth?" He nodded. "She admitted she said those things, that she thought you were trying to control me. She said she was angry and jealous, but she regrets it now." I sighed. "And she only said that after I became her last hope." He looked away. "Mom, I'm not asking you to forgive her for me. I'm asking you to forgive her for yourself. I can see what this is doing to you." His words pierced through me like sunlight through clouds. "Do you hate me for saying no?" I asked softly. He shook his head. "No, I could never hate you, but I'm scared. I'm scared I'm going to lose her, and Sophia will lose her mother." He rubbed his face and added, "She's getting weaker every day." I looked at my son, the same boy I used to hold when he cried after scraping his knees, the same boy who'd promised to take care of me when I got old. And here he was, broken, pleading for something I could give, but couldn't bring myself to. The next morning, I drove to the church. Father Daniels had known me for decades. When he saw me sitting alone in the pew, he came over quietly. "Margaret," he said gently, "what's troubling you?" I told him everything from the betrayal to the hospital to the words that still burned in my memory. When I finished, he sat quietly for a moment, then said, "You've carried your pain with grace, my dear. But forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from the poison they left inside you." I frowned. "So, are you saying I should help her?" He smiled sadly. "I can't tell you what to do, but I'll tell you this. Mercy doesn't always mean surrender. Sometimes showing compassion is the greatest form of power." Those words stayed with me. All day, all night. By dawn, I was still awake, sitting by the window with tears in my eyes, whispering, "What would my husband have done?" And deep in my heart, I knew the answer. He would have given without expecting anything in return. He would have forgiven, even if it hurt. So the next morning, I got dressed, grabbed my purse, and drove back to the hospital. When I walked into Claire's room, the nurse looked surprised. Claire was asleep, her skin pale as paper. Ethan was sitting beside her, holding her hand. He looked up, eyes red from crying. "Mom," he whispered. I smiled faintly. "Good morning, sweetheart." He stood, wiping his face. "What are you doing here?" I looked down at Claire, then back at him. "Tell Dr. Reynolds to put me back on the donor list." Ethan's lips parted, his eyes filling with tears. "Mom, are you sure?" I nodded. "Yes, let's get it done." He pulled me into a hug, his body shaking. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. I smiled through my tears. "No, son, none of us deserve grace. That's why it's so powerful." 3 days later, the surgery was set. As I lay on the hospital bed, hooked to IV lines, I felt an odd calm. Maybe this was how peace felt, not the absence of pain, but the acceptance of it. Ethan sat beside me, holding my hand. "Mom, I'll never forget this." I smiled. "Just take care of her and my granddaughter." He nodded, his eyes glistening. The nurse came in to prep me for surgery. "We'll start soon, Mrs. Turner," she said kindly. But just as they began to wheel me toward the operating room, I heard shouting in the hallway. It was Dr. Reynolds. His voice was tense. "Wait! Stop the prep! There's a problem with the test results!" The nurse froze. Ethan looked alarmed. "What's going on?" Dr. Reynolds rushed over, holding a folder. "We just got the final compatibility panel. There's something off. Margaret isn't just a close match." He stopped, staring at me. "She's a direct bloodline match." I frowned. "What do you mean, direct?" He looked at Ethan, then back at me. "Mrs. Turner, Claire isn't just your daughter-in-law." The room went silent. I blinked, my heart pounding. "What are you saying, doctor?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "She's your biological daughter." And in that moment, everything around me blurred, the lights, the machines, the voices. I froze, staring at the doctor in disbelief as the world seemed to tilt beneath me. My daughter-in-law, the woman who told me I wasn't family, Dr. Reynolds, was my real daughter. My hands clutching the sides of the bed as if I needed to hold on to something real. What did you just say?" My voice trembled. He sighed, glancing between Ethan and me. "I know this is a shock, Mrs. Turner, but based on the latest cross-match and genetic verification, Claire shares your mitochondrial markers. That means you're not just a compatible donor, you're her biological mother." For a moment, everything inside me went silent. The beeping of the monitors faded. The voices around me blurred. I could only hear the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. "No," I whispered. "That's impossible." Ethan looked at me, eyes wide with confusion. "What is he saying? Mom, is this some kind of mistake?" I shook my head numbly. "I don't know. Dr. Reynolds held up a hand gently. We double-checked the results with national records. Claire's adoption file was sealed, but it matched your old hospital record from 1954. You gave birth to a baby girl that year. Right here in this hospital. My breath caught. 1954. The year I was 19. The year I'd been forced to give up my first child. I felt the room spin. I never told anyone, I said softly. Not even my husband. My parents made me give her up. They said she'd bring shame to the family. I was just a scared girl who didn't even get to hold her baby before they took her away. Tears welled in my eyes, blurring the lights above. Dr. Reynolds nodded quietly. That baby was Claire. I turned my head slowly toward the woman lying unconscious beside us. The woman who'd hated me, rejected me, called me an outsider, my own daughter. My lips trembled as a single tear slid down my cheek. Oh, Lord. Ethan stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, trying to process what he just heard. You're telling me... He paused, rubbing his forehead. That my wife is... my sister? Dr. Reynolds held up his hands. Not biologically. Margaret is your mother by blood, but Claire was adopted before you were born. You share no direct paternal DNA. Legally and genetically, you two are not siblings. Ethan exhaled shakily, pressing his palms to his eyes. This is insane. The nurse quietly stepped back, giving us space as the truth settled like a thundercloud over the room. I looked at Claire, pale, fragile, unaware, and a strange mix of pain and love swelled inside me. The woman who'd wounded me the most was the very one I'd been missing my whole life. And now, she was dying. They moved me back to my room while they reviewed the results again. I sat by the window, staring at the rain trickling down the glass. Every drop looked like a memory trying to wash away. How could fate be so cruel? For 70 years, I'd prayed to meet the daughter I lost. And when I finally did, she didn't even know who I was and hated me. I thought about every moment I'd seen her smile at Ethan, every time she called me Margaret with coldness, every insult she threw my way. And suddenly, none of it mattered. She was my child, my blood, the one I had carried beneath my heart, the one I'd been forced to abandon. I buried my face in my hands and sobbed until my chest ached. When Ethan walked in later, his face was pale. He closed the door behind him slowly. Mom, he said quietly, they confirmed it. It's true. I nodded without looking up. He sat beside me, his voice barely a whisper. What are we going to do? I looked at him, tears glistening in my eyes. We're going to save her. He blinked. After everything she said? After everything she did to you? I nodded again, because now I know she didn't reject me out of cruelty. She rejected me because she never knew she was rejecting her own mother. And if I let her die now, I'll never forgive myself. Ethan's jaw tightened as emotion overwhelmed him. You really are the strongest woman I know. I smiled faintly. No, son, just a mother. That evening, as I prepared for surgery again, I asked Dr. Reynolds if I could see Claire one last time before they took me in. When I entered her room, the machines beeped softly beside her. Her face was pale, her lips dry. I sat beside her and took her hand gently. Claire, I whispered, there's something you don't know. Something I should have told you long ago, if only I'd known myself. I squeezed her hand, my tears falling freely now. You are my daughter. Her fingers twitched slightly, and I thought I saw her eyelashes flutter, but she didn't wake. I prayed for you every day. I continued softly. Even when I didn't know your name, I prayed that you'd grow up happy, that someone would love you. I didn't know God would bring you back into my life this way." I leaned closer and kissed her forehead. "You said I wasn't family anymore, but, sweetheart, I always was." The next morning, they wheeled us both into surgery. Before the anesthesia kicked in, I whispered a prayer. "Lord, let my heart be lighter when I wake. Let her live, even if she never loves me back." Then everything went dark. When I opened my eyes again, the room was quiet except for the steady beeping of the monitor. My throat was dry, my body weak, but I was alive. And so was she. Ethan was sitting at my bedside, his eyes red but smiling. "It worked," he said softly. "She's going to be okay." A wave of relief washed over me. "Thank God," I whispered. He leaned forward, holding my hand. "She's asking for you." I blinked. "She's awake?" He nodded. "Barely, but yes, she wants to talk to you." The nurse helped me sit up as they wheeled Claire's bed beside mine. Her eyes were half open, her voice weak but trembling. "Margaret," she whispered. I smiled gently. "Yes, dear?" Tears filled her eyes. Why did you do it? After everything I said to you?" I reached out and brushed her hair back softly. "Because no matter what you said, you're my daughter." Her lips parted in confusion. "What?" Ethan looked down, silent, letting me speak. "I didn't know until yesterday," I said softly. "The doctors found out through the blood tests. You were adopted, and I was the one who gave birth to you." Claire's eyes widened, her breath catching. "That can't be true." "It is," I said, squeezing her hand. "I lost you when I was 19, and now, after 70 years, God brought you back to me." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she covered her mouth, shaking her head in disbelief. "Oh my God." I smiled through my tears. "Looks like you were family all along." She began to cry soft, broken sobs that came from deep inside her chest. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, "for everything I said, for how I treated you. I didn't know." I wiped a tear from her cheek and whispered, "Hush, baby. You don't have to apologize. I already forgave you." Days passed, and we both slowly recovered. For the first time in years, the house was filled with laughter again. Claire would sit by my bed, brushing my hair and telling me stories about Sophia. Sometimes we cried together. Sometimes we just sat in silence, holding hands. It felt like healing, slow, painful, but real. One afternoon, Ethan walked in with Sophia, holding a bouquet of white roses. "Look, Grandma," she said cheerfully. "Mommy said you're her mommy too." I laughed softly, tears filling my eyes. "That's right, sweetheart." Claire smiled shyly. She insisted on bringing flowers for both of us. I looked at her and saw not the woman who once hated me, but the child I'd lost, now returned. And I thought, maybe life really does find a way to heal even the deepest wounds. But just when peace began to return to our lives, something unexpected happened again. A letter arrived in the mail with no return address. I opened it slowly, my hands shaking. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and when I read what was written, my heart stopped cold. It said, "You were never supposed to find her. There's more you don't know about Claire's past and about the man who adopted her." I froze. Who sent this? And what secret could still be hiding after all this time? For days, that letter haunted me. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time I looked at Claire smiling, healing, finally calling me Mom, I felt a cold, gnawing dread in my stomach. Who sent it? What did they mean by "you were never supposed to find her"? Ethan wanted to tear it up, said it was probably some cruel prank, but something deep in my bones told me otherwise. The handwriting was neat but old-fashioned, the ink slightly faded as though it had been written by someone who knew the past too well. The next morning, I decided to visit Dr. Reynolds. Maybe the hospital records could tell me more about Claire's adoption, something the letter hinted I was missing. He hesitated when I asked, "Mrs. Turner, those records are sealed under federal protection. Opening them could violate confidentiality laws." I met his eyes steadily. "Doctor, I'm 70 years old. I've already been through 2 surgeries, a lost child, and a found one. If there's something in those papers that can help me protect my family, I need to know." He studied me for a long moment, then finally nodded. "Come with me." The hospital's archive room smelled of dust and time. Rows of gray metal cabinets stretched from wall to wall. Dr. Reynolds handed me a thin, yellowed file, marked Infant Female 1954. When I opened it, I saw my own signature on the birth record. Margaret Louise Turner. And under Mother, name withheld by request of family. But it was the next line that made my pulse stop. Unknown, listed as deceased. Except, someone had written a name there in pencil later, a name I recognized immediately. Edward Turner, my husband, the man I'd married years after that birth. My voice trembled. "That's impossible." Dr. Reynolds frowned. "Edward Turner, your late husband?" I nodded slowly, my hand shaking. But Edward didn't even meet me until 5 years later. He leaned closer to the file. "Look here, this note was added in 1960. 6 years after Claire's birth, someone updated the record." "Who?" I asked. He hesitated. "The handwriting looks like it was from the hospital's old director, Dr. Harold Mason." My stomach tightened. Dr. Mason Edward's cousin. I whispered, "Oh God." Back home, I sat in the living room, staring at an old photo of Edward and me on our wedding day. Could it be true? Had he known? Had he somehow been involved in Claire's adoption and never told me? Claire came downstairs, her steps soft, her smile warm. "Mom, are you okay? You've been quiet all day." I quickly folded the letter and hid it under a newspaper. "I'm fine, dear, just tired." But she saw through me instantly, that same sharp intuition I used to have when I was young. "Is this about that letter?" she asked softly. I froze. "You know about it?" She nodded. "I saw it on the table this morning. I didn't read it, but it scared you, didn't it?" I sighed and took her hands. "Claire, there are things in your adoption file that don't add up. Things that make me think your father, my husband, might have known about you all along." Her face went pale. "What are you saying?" "I think Edward may have arranged your adoption." She shook her head in disbelief. "That doesn't make sense. Why would he do that?" I looked down at our clasped hands, whispering, "Maybe to protect me, or maybe to protect himself." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the past. I dug through the old chest in my bedroom, the one where I kept Edward's letters, photographs, and war memorabilia. At the bottom was an envelope I'd never noticed before, sealed, yellowed, and marked, to be opened if Margaret ever learns the truth. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter, written in Edward's neat cursive. "My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, it means the secret I swore to protect has come to light. You were never meant to suffer for it, but life rarely grants mercy where guilt lives. The child you bore in 1954, I knew about her. She was mine too. Your parents didn't just force you to give her up. They made me sign away my rights to her, claiming I was unfit because of my condition after the war. They said if I told you, they would destroy both our lives. So I stayed silent. Years later, when I learned she was adopted by my cousin Harold's friends, I made sure she'd be safe. I never imagined she'd grow up to marry our son. I've carried this guilt all my life. Forgive me, Margaret. And if by God's will she ever returns to you, tell her I loved her even before I met her. Edward. I sank onto the bed, the letter trembling in my hands. Claire was his daughter too, Ethan's half-sister, my son's wife. I felt my world tilt, the walls closing in. This was the truth the letter had warned about, the secret that was never meant to be found. The next morning, I couldn't look Ethan in the eyes. He was in the kitchen making tea, humming softly, unaware that his whole life had just changed. Claire came in, kissed him on the cheek, and poured herself coffee. They looked so peaceful, so normal, like any other couple. And yet, the truth sat heavy in my heart like a ticking bomb. How could I tell them? Should I tell them at all? Because if I did, everything, their marriage, their peace, their future would be shattered. And if I didn't, I'd live with a lie that could destroy us later. I looked at the letter again, Edward's final words blurring through my tears. You were never meant to suffer for it, but I already was. And I hadn't even decided what to do yet. Because outside, on the porch, someone had just slipped another envelope under my door. No name, no return address, just one line written in the same old handwriting. If you don't tell them soon, I will. My heart froze when I read those words. If you don't tell them soon, I will. It felt like the walls of my home were closing in on me. Someone out there knew the truth, the whole truth, and they wanted to expose it. For days, I hid the envelope, pretending everything was fine. I smiled through breakfast, listened to Claire talk about her new diet, and watched Ethan laugh as if our family wasn't hanging on by a thread. But at night, I'd sit on the porch, clutching Edward's letter in one hand and the new note in the other, wondering who was behind it. Dr. Reynolds? The hospital's old staff? Someone from Harold's family? The sound of the crickets mixed with my racing heartbeat. Every creak in the house made me jump. I hadn't felt this scared since the night I gave birth alone 70 years ago. 3 days later, I decided I couldn't live in fear anymore. I went to the local library and pulled out the old town archives. If Edward's cousin Harold had been part of this, there would be records, financial transactions, adoption listings, maybe even a court document. And there it was. An article from 1955. Prominent Dr. Harold Mason arranges private adoption for war widow. The description matched my story exactly. The dates, the hospital, even the phrase, for the safety of the child. But something else caught my attention, the adoptive parents' names. Thomas and Linda Brooks. I whispered the name like a ghost I'd never met. Brooks, Claire's maiden name. It was all connected. Dr. Mason had arranged the adoption himself. Edward's cousin had given our baby to his close friends. No wonder everything was kept quiet. No wonder Edward never told me. The secret wasn't just shameful, it was orchestrated, controlled. And now, 70 years later, someone wanted me to pay for unearthing it. That night, the rain fell hard. Thunder shook the house. I was about to close the curtains when I saw a figure standing at the edge of my yard. A tall man in a dark coat, just standing there facing the house. I froze. My hand trembled on the curtain. When lightning flashed, I saw his face older, maybe in his 60s, but familiar. Before I could move, he turned and disappeared into the dark. I grabbed my phone and called Ethan. Son, I think someone's watching the house. He was there within minutes, soaked from the rain, his eyes full of worry. Mom, what's going on? You've been acting strange for weeks. I wanted to tell him everything. About the letters, about Edward's secret, about Claire. But when I looked at his face, his innocent, loving face, I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I whispered, It's nothing, sweetheart. Just an old woman's imagination. He frowned, unconvinced. You're sure? Yes, I lied. Go home. Get some rest. When he left, I locked every door and window. But I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room, clutching a photograph of Edward and me. And that's when I heard it, the faint creak of the back door opening. I reached for the lamp, heart pounding. Who's there? I called out. No answer. Then a shadow moved through the hallway, slow, steady, deliberate. My knees trembled. I was 70, not some strong young woman. But fear can make you do things you didn't think you could. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a metal candlestick, and held it tight. Show yourself. The shadow stepped into the light, and I dropped the candlestick. It was him, Dr. Reynolds. Mrs. Turner, he said softly, hands raised. Please, don't be afraid. I backed away. What are you doing in my house? I didn't mean to scare you, he said quickly. I knocked, but you didn't answer. I saw your lights on. I needed to speak to you. It's urgent. I stared at him, still shaking. You could have called. He hesitated. I couldn't risk leaving a trace. My stomach tightened. A trace of what? He sighed heavily and sat down, motioning for me to do the same. Margaret, I shouldn't even be here, but I think someone else knows what you found, and they won't stop until the truth is out. I swallowed hard. Who? He looked me dead in the eyes. Harold Mason's son, Richard. The name hit me like ice water. Richard, I whispered. Edward's second cousin? He nodded. He's been digging into his father's old files for years, trying to expose the illegal adoptions that happened under Harold's name. When he found your file, Claire's file, he must have realized what it meant. I stared at him, my heart thundering. He's the one sending the letters. Yes, Dr. Reynolds said gravely, and I believe he's the one who was outside your house tonight. I could barely breathe. Everything was spinning. Dr. Reynolds leaned forward. Margaret, you have to tell your family before Richard does. He's already reached out to a reporter. If this story gets out, it won't just ruin your son's life. It'll destroy Claire. Tears welled up in my eyes. She's my daughter. I can't let that happen. Then tell them, he urged gently. They deserve to hear it from you, not from the news. I looked down, shaking. I can't. Not yet. Ethan's heart wouldn't take it. He sighed and stood. Then please, at least prepare yourself, because when the truth comes out... He paused, his voice low. No one will see you the same again. When he left, the silence felt unbearable. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the storm inside me had only begun. I sat there till morning, staring at the 2 letters, the photo of Edward, and the truth that had shattered everything I knew about love, loyalty, and family. And as the first rays of light broke through my window, I made a decision. I was going to find Richard Mason before he found me. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy heart and trembling hands. My decision still echoed in my mind to find Richard Mason before he finds me. The air outside was cool, but my chest burned with fear and determination. I packed a few essentials in my old handbag, Edward's letter, the 2 anonymous notes, a photo of Claire and Ethan, and my car keys. It had been years since I'd driven alone out of town, but this was no ordinary errand. This was survival. I had to protect my family. Richard Mason lived 2 towns away, in a quiet neighborhood surrounded by maple trees and old houses with porches that looked out on empty streets. I parked a few houses down from his address, 47 Willow Drive, and watched the house for a while. Curtains drawn, no sound. After 10 minutes, I gathered my courage and walked up to the porch. My knees ached. My hands shook, but I knocked anyway. No answer. I knocked again. Mr. Mason? It's Margaret Turner. I need to talk to you. There was a long silence. Then, the sound of footsteps. The door opened a crack. A man in his late 60s stood there, silver hair, sharp gray eyes, wearing a brown sweater that looked far too neat for someone who spent his life stirring up other people's secrets. He looked at me calmly. "Mrs. Turner, I was wondering when you'd come." I stiffened. "So it was you. You sent the letters." He smiled faintly, almost proud. "You deserved to know the truth, didn't you?" "The truth?" I snapped. "You call destroying my family the truth?" He opened the door wider and gestured for me to come in. "You'd better sit down. We both have things to say." The house was filled with old files, newspapers, and photos pinned to the wall. It looked like a museum of guilt and curiosity. He poured me tea, though I barely touched it. "I've been collecting these documents for years," he said. "My father, Harold Mason, did terrible things. He made deals with families to hide births, forge papers, even sell babies to rich couples who couldn't conceive." My stomach twisted, and my child was one of them. He nodded. "Yes, but your case was special. Your husband, Edward, tried to stop it. He loved you. He wanted to protect you. But by the time he found out, my father had already signed everything away." He pulled a file from the table and slid it toward me. Inside were old black and white photos me, young and scared in a hospital gown, and a newborn baby with a tiny bracelet labeled Infant Turner. Tears blurred my vision. "Where did you get these?" "From my father's old files," he said. "When he died, I found everything. But I didn't send those letters to hurt you, Margaret." His tone softened. "I sent them because someone else found the files too, someone who doesn't care about the truth, someone who wants money." I looked up sharply. "Money?" He nodded. "A reporter named Carl Benson. He's been blackmailing me, threatening to expose every illegal adoption my father arranged unless I pay him." I felt dizzy. "And he knows about Claire?" "Yes. He knows she's your daughter and your daughter-in-law." I covered my face with my hands. "Oh, God." He leaned forward. "That's why I wrote to you. I thought if you told them first, if you controlled the story, no one could use it against you. But if this reporter goes public—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. I already knew what that meant. Our family's name would be dragged through every paper in America. Claire's life, her reputation, would be ruined. And Ethan? I couldn't even imagine what that would do to him. I stood up slowly, clutching the file. "Where can I find this Carl Benson?" Richard looked alarmed. "Margaret, no. You can't confront him. He's dangerous." "I've survived losing a child, a husband, and my health," I said firmly. "I can survive one greedy reporter." Before he could stop me, I walked out. My heart pounded as I drove back toward town. Rain clouds gathered above, matching the storm brewing in my chest. If this man thought he could destroy my family for money, he was about to learn that a mother's love doesn't fade with age, it grows sharper. The next morning, I found him. Carl Benson worked for a small digital news outlet in the city. I walked into his office, unannounced gray hair, tucked neatly under my scarf, the file from Richard clutched tightly under my arm. He looked up from his desk, smirking. "Well, if it isn't the famous Mrs. Turner?" I stiffened. "You know who I am." "Oh, I do," he said. "And I also know your little secret. Quite the story, a mother and daughter separated for 70 years, reunited as family, and then married into the same bloodline." He leaned back, smug. "That'll get me a Pulitzer." "You'll destroy innocent lives," I said quietly. He shrugged. "Innocent? Your husband forged records, my dear. Your cousin-in-law broke the law. You think the world will see this as tragic? No, they'll see it as scandal." I stepped closer, voice trembling but fierce. "How much are you asking for?" He raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you're smarter than you look. $50,000, and I forget the whole thing. I almost laughed. You think I have that kind of money? He smiled coldly. Then I guess the story runs tomorrow morning. Something inside me snapped. For years, I'd been the quiet one, the forgiving one, the woman who smiled through betrayal and loss. But not today. Today, I was a mother fighting for her child. I looked him dead in the eyes. If you print that story, I'll make sure the world knows how you got your information. You'll go to prison for extortion before your article even hits the front page. He froze, the smugness fading from his face. I took a deep breath, then continued. And one more thing. You're not the only one with proof. I have the originals. Every file, every signature, every adoption record your source gave you. So go ahead, Carl. Publish it. Let's see who the world believes, a desperate blackmailer or a grieving mother. For the first time, he looked uncertain. His jaw tightened, eyes narrowing. You don't scare me. Then why are your hands shaking? I asked softly. I turned and walked out, leaving him speechless. Outside, I stood on the sidewalk, breathing hard, rain falling against my cheeks. I didn't know what would happen next, whether he'd actually stop or call my bluff. But for the first time in months, I felt a strange kind of peace. I had faced the storm head on. When I got home that evening, Ethan and Claire were waiting at the kitchen table. Claire's eyes were red. Ethan looked pale. Between them sat an open envelope, not one of mine. A new one. And this time, the words were printed in bold black ink. Too late, Mrs. Turner. The world knows everything. My knees gave out, and the room spun. Claire whispered, voice shaking. Mom, what does this mean? I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could speak, Ethan's phone started ringing. He looked at the screen, his face draining of color. It's Channel 7 News, he said quietly. They're asking for a comment. The truth had broken free, and nothing would ever be the same again.